Good morning, everybody. It is 7 o'clock. You are very welcome to join us here on The Breakfast Show on Sky News this Thursday morning. Outrage after a Tory MP says people who use food banks don't know how to cook or manage their finances properly. The government's under pressure to provide people with immediate and practical help as the cost of living crisis worsens and fears of a recession grow. We'll have a clearer picture of the state of the economy in just a moment when the latest GDP figures are released. Also joined this morning by the Justice Minister, Victoria Atkins, as well as the Shadow Levelling Up Secretary, Lisa Nandy. It is Thursday, the 12th of May. Under pressure, growing calls for the government to take action to tackle the rising cost of living, as Sky News understands that tax cuts could be announced before the end of July. Backlash after a Conservative MP says families are relying on food banks because of a lack of cooking skills.
We've got generation after generation who cannot cook properly, they can't cook a meal from scratch, they cannot budget. The challenge is there.
I'll be reporting on the state of the economy. The GDP figures are due to be released shortly amidst a cost of living crisis and fears of a recession.
And I'm in Bristol in London to find out how people are making ends meet as the cost of living increases.
Pushed by Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the president of historically neutral Finland is set to give the green light for his country to join NATO.
The search for a missing teenager whose disappearance from Bristol is being treated as child abduction. North Korea confirms its first COVID outbreak and orders a strict national lockdown. Rebecca Vardy returns to the stand again this morning after she admits trying to leak another story to the media during her libel trial against Colleen Rooney. Airmail, we report on plans to deliver letters to remote parts of the country. Also coming up on the programme for you this morning, wherever you're watching us around the world. We'll be joined by the UK's Eurovision entry and TikTok star Sam Ryder ahead of this weekend's grand final. And we speak to the Ukrainian model who bagged herself a job at fashion brand Mulberry after her appearance at a Stop the War protest went viral. Morning, everybody. The Chancellor is under increasing pressure to take action to tackle the cost of living crisis. As Sky News understands, he could announce tax cuts by the end of July. The Bank of England has warned that the UK could be at risk of recession later this year and that inflation is also likely to be even higher than expected. And some breaking news on the latest economic growth figures are coming up for you via Helen Ann, who's standing by in Stoke-on-Trent this morning. Hi, Helen Ann, tell us more.
Good morning, Kay. So we've had the latest quarterly GDP figures. GDP, of course, the total value of all products and services in the economy, a really good barometer that we use to really get a sense of how the economy is doing. And in the first quarter of this year, January to March, the economy grew by 0.8%. What's important, Kay, is that the rate of growth is slowing down because in the last quarter, the end of last year, growth was 1.3%. So that rate of growth is slowing. And although there was slight growth in that quarter, a lot of attention will be not on this figure, but of course what's going to happen later in the year, because it was just last week, wasn't it, that we heard very dire warnings from the Bank of England about what they expect the economy to do later in the year. They are expecting it to shrink. They are expecting potential recession. They're forecasting huge inflation, potentially over 10%. Really, really big problems coming down the line. There are a few drivers and causes to all this, Kay. There's problems in the supply chain still, which is putting challenges to the production of businesses. But the key thing, especially going forward, is inflation. That is a problem for businesses, and crucially, it is a problem for individuals. People simply feel that they cannot spend their money in the economy at the moment, and that is what causes potential shrinkage. So big problems and questions for the Chancellor coming up. Of course, the terrible crisis that this means playing out for ordinary families in their homes who simply feel that they cannot afford the basics. That will all start feeding through to the big economic numbers, and that will be a big concern for the Chancellor.
OK, thank you. Let's take you down to Brixton Market, should we? Shaman is there this morning. What's the feeling where you are this morning? Good morning.
Good morning, Kay. Well, people are still setting up down here at Brixton Market, but the feeling here is the same across the UK. People really are struggling. They're really facing the brunt of this cost of living crisis now. And we've actually had research released today, a monthly survey by YouGov, which says that UK households do feel like they're bearing the brunt of the cost of living crisis, and the confidence in household finances are at an all-time low. Now, in real terms, this means that people are having to make really difficult decisions about whether or not they're able to heat their food or heat their homes. We've heard stories of people using hot water bottles in order to keep themselves warm. And just yesterday, as you well know, I was at a car boot sale in Carshalton where people were trying to sell their belongings to make some extra cash to supplement their income. And here people are also trying to take extra shifts and extra hours just to be able to top up that income too. And one of the common feelings is that it's really not being targeted by the government. There's not enough help. And interestingly, yesterday I spoke to a 20-year-old girl. She said that for the past 10 years, since she was 10 years old, she's been living in austerity, and now her future doesn't look hopeful and it doesn't look promising, and she worries about what it's going to be like when she enters the work market, when she goes into full-time employment. So the feeling here is the feeling across the UK. People are worried and they're concerned about their future.
OK, Shaman, thank you. Just a reminder for you that next week we're going to be taking the show on the road for a special series of programmes, going back to my roots and finding out how the good people of Wigan feel about the cost of living crisis. Do let me know if you'd like to get involved by sending me a tweet. And that is going to be here on the programme all next week, actually. The Breakfast Show on the road, 16th to the 19th of May. And speaking to the government minister about those GDP figures and lots of other things as well, coming up very shortly. Before that, though, the president of Finland is set to give the go-ahead today for his country to join NATO amid heightened security concerns following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Let's take you straight to Kiev, should we? And Deborah is standing by for us this morning, as you know. Hi, Deborah. So it looks as though we could get an announcement later on today.
Yes, and it's a hugely historic moment, this. The exact opposite of President Putin, of what President Putin wanted when he invaded Ukraine. He came to this country saying that he wanted less NATO at his borders, fearing that this country, Ukraine, would seek to join NATO, which it has been trying to. But as a result of the aggression here in this country, other European nations are looking at their security situation in a very different light now, and no more so than in Finland, a country that has been neutral militarily since the end of the Second World War, balancing that relationship between the West and between its eastern neighbour, Russia. And yet today we're expecting the Finnish president to give his verdict on whether he believes his country should join NATO. All indicators are that he is going to say that it should, and his decision really is decisive. It sets in course a train of events which could then lead to a formal application by Finland to join the alliance, and that its neighbour Sweden is also expected to follow suit. And just one final point, the Finnish president was speaking yesterday with our Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who paid him a visit, and in that conversation he gave the reason why Finland is making this historic move and blamed Russia, said to President Putin effectively, just look in the mirror, what is happening here is because of you.
OK, thank you. Still to come on the programme for you this morning, as the government mulls scrapping the Northern Ireland Protocol. Going to be joined by the former Permanent Secretary at the Department for exiting the EU, and that's Philip Rycroft. Also joined by an international media lawyer, Paul Tweed, on the court battle involving the wives of two rather famous English footballers. And after 8, we'll speak to the Shadow Levelling Up Secretary, that's Lisa Nandy. Also making news for you, the Foreign Secretary Liz Truss will speak to the Vice President of the European Commission this morning about trading arrangements with Northern Ireland. There are reports that the government is preparing to rip up parts of the deal it agreed with Brussels because of unionist opposition.
The protocol is harming Northern Ireland. It's harming our economy. It is undermining political stability here. So I think in those circumstances, and in order to safeguard the Belfast or Good Friday Agreement and the political institutions, the UK government is well within its rights to act in these circumstances.
Detectives investigating the disappearance of a 15-year-old girl, Maddie Thomas, in Bristol, say they now think that she's been abducted. The teenager disappeared in the South Mead area of Bristol more than 2 weeks ago, telling a relative that she was going to the shops. Somerset and Avon police say that Maddie is a child in foster care. No one has permission to keep her from her carers. She is vulnerable and at risk of being taken advantage of. We're really concerned about her safety and have a dedicated team working extremely hard to locate her. Levi Belfield has asked permission to get married in jail. The serial killer proposed to a female visitor at HMP Frankland in County Durham, where he's serving 2 whole-life tariffs for murdering Marsha McDonnell, Amélie Delagrange and Millie Dowler. The Ministry of Justice says it is considering his application in the usual way. Day 3 of the so-called Wagatha Christie court battle involving the wives of 2 football stars. Rebecca Vardy is suing Colleen Rooney for libel at the High Court. Mrs Vardy's cross-examination is due to continue. Mrs Rooney accused her of leaking false stories about her private life in 2019, which Mrs Vardy denies. The recently resigned Prime Minister of Sri Lanka has been moved to a naval base for his own safety. He stood down after months of protests over the country's economic crisis. The police have been giving orders to shoot looters and anyone damaging property. More than a dozen homes have been destroyed in wildfires in California. The fire spread in Laguna yesterday and has so far burned down around 200 acres of land and hasn't yet been contained. No injuries have been reported. An attempt to protect abortion rights with a federal law in the US has failed. The bid follows the leak of a Supreme Court document that appeared to suggest that justices plan to overturn the almost 50-year-old legislation this summer. The Democrat-led House of Representatives passed the bill to protect the rights, but it failed in the upper Senate chamber. North Korea has announced its first coronavirus infection more than 2 years into the pandemic. The leader, Kim Jong-un, has called for preventative COVID measures to be raised to maximum levels. So what does that mean? Let's find out. The man in the know is Tom, of course, as always, in Beijing. Hello to you, Tom. So what are they planning?
Morning, Kay. Well, these preventative measures include full lockdown of all the cities in North Korea, and I think that's a sign of how serious this is. There had been a few raised eyebrows at the idea that North Korea hadn't had any confirmed COVID cases over the last 2.5 years, given its border with South Korea and China, which both suffered big outbreaks over the years. So the fact they're announcing it, the fact that KCNA, the state news agency, says this is the biggest emergency incident in the country is a sign of how serious things are. We don't know how many cases there are as yet. We do know it's an Omicron subvariant, but it's not specified exactly how many have been confirmed. I think what's really worrying about this and why it could be really a catastrophe is that we've seen what happens when Omicron goes through populations with low vaccination rates, especially amongst the elderly. We saw that in Hong Kong and the fatalities that resulted. North Korea doesn't really have any vaccination rates at all. There isn't a vaccination program. It refused offers from COVAX, the vaccine sharing initiative, and also from China. They offered 3 million vaccine doses back in September. North Korea said, give them to countries that are needier. They might be needing them very soon. What they're going to do is lock down, and in an authoritarian country like North Korea, you can see that is one of the tools available to them. But it's still really hard. Even those lockdowns don't get rid of Omicron by themselves. We've seen that in Shanghai. And the infrastructure you need around that in terms of delivering supplies, delivering water to residents, that was very strained in Shanghai. And North Korea is going to have a very tough time dealing with that. Now, South Korea has said it is happy to offer humanitarian assistance. We'll see whether North Korea takes up on that offer. It's been frosty ever since the election of the new president of South Korea, who's a lot more hawkish. But yeah, 2.5 years into the pandemic, we could be looking at one of the worst COVID catastrophes still to come.
OK, for now, thanks very much indeed. Thanks a lot. Joined by the Minister of State at the Ministry of Justice, Victoria Atkins. It's great to see you. Thanks for joining us on the programme this morning. Quick thought on the GDP figures before we go any further. 0.8%, slowing growth from 1.3% in the previous quarter.
We had the fastest growth in the G7 last year. We've got this slowing now, but we're back on track. 24-25 will be right back up to the fastest rate of growth, and that was very much the point of the Queen's speech, was to say, look, we've got to really help our economy grow over the coming years, and the Queen's speech is going to set the legislative framework to enable that to happen.
OK, to that end, one of your MPs, Lee Anderson, making headlines this morning. Here's what he said in the Commons yesterday.
There's not this massive use for food banks in this country. We've got generation after generation who cannot cook properly, they can't cook a meal from scratch, they cannot budget. The challenge is there.
Do you agree with him?
I think when I was watching Lee in the chamber, I think he was talking about his own local food bank and how the food bank was trying to offer not just immediate help with provision of food, but also longer-term help, for example, help with budgeting and so on. And I've got community groups in my constituency, the Alford Hub, that really tries to wrap their arms around people and look after them and help to address the various aspects that may be causing difficulties. So look, I absolutely believe that if volunteers, people working on the ground, can find ways of offering longer-term support as well as the immediate help of a food bank, then of course they should do that.
This is the front page of the Mirror this morning. I mean, this is how it will be interpreted throughout the country. Do you agree with him? Tories, the poor can't cook.
I absolutely.
Well, that's how it's coming across.
I know, and as I say, having watched the debate, I'm not sure that was actually what Lee was saying. When we look at the work of the government, we have tried not just to give immediate help with issues such as energy costs. We know that energy costs are really fueling great worries, great problems for people, as indeed they are around the world, but also trying to offer longer-term solutions. So, for example, you'll remember the debate over free school meals during the holidays, and we are spending something like £200 million on holiday activity programmes in schools.
No, Minister, this is the point where you say, you don't agree with him. That was a ridiculous, crass thing for him to say, and he needs to apologise.
Yeah, in fairness, I have said I don't agree with him.
And he needs to apologise.
I think Lee is very articulate. He will, I'm sure, make himself clear. I think he's doing a bit of media today. But this is not the view of me or anyone else in government. We want to give not just immediate help, but longer-term support as well. I really appreciate the efforts of food banks and voluntary groups around the country who work day in, day out to help people when they are in great distress.
Do you condemn what he said?
I do. I mean, look, I do not agree with it. I do. That headline, as I said, I'm not sure that headline really reflects what Lee said.
Let's listen again to what he said.
Let's listen again to what he said. The whole debate.
Let's listen again to what he said.
There's not this massive use for food banks in this country. We've got generation after generation who cannot cook properly, they can't cook a meal from scratch, they cannot budget. The challenge is there.
So, as I say, I watched the full debate, the full section of the debate, and he was talking about his local food bank. Clearly, I do not agree with that headline on the Mirror. Clearly, the need for food banks, if people need that help, they must please seek it. And I think, there isn't...
He was basically saying people want to go to a food bank to get a ready meal because they can't be bothered cooking.
Yeah, no, that's not right. That is absolutely not right. We know that's not right. I've spent my ministerial career working with very vulnerable people. I do, the complexities as to how people end up in situations that they feel very, very distressed about. As a constituency MP, I see it, and cooking lessons will not be the complete solution to that.
Of course not. 250,000 homes are going to fall into destitution next year. And you have an MP, a Tory MP, saying something like that. Hardly surprising that people think that this government's out of touch.
Well, that's not, in fairness, that does not reflect the work of the government. I mean, if you look at the very immediate work that we have done already this month or last month to help with the cost of living crisis, including the council tax rebate that happened last month. We have raised the national living wage to help the poorest and the lowest paid of people. And in July, we will be raising the national insurance threshold, which means that people keep more of their hard-earned cash. So these are all measures that we're bringing in. We've doubled the Household Support Fund. This is a fund that local councils administer to help the most vulnerable and the neediest in their local communities. We've said that a third of that must be helping pensioners, because we are very, very aware of the distress that people are in at the moment, and we want to help them.
And yet 250,000 people, homes, not just people, homes are going to fall into destitution. What a word that is. What we could do is have a windfall tax, which would raise about £2 billion.
Well, we also also, I think, need to help people understand when there is help available. So we know there are something like 850,000 households that aren't claiming pension credits to which they are entitled. So getting the message out to people to seek help where they can. There's a really good website called moneyhelper.org.uk where people can get free advice, trusted advice as to what's available for them.
People can't afford
get
electricity to power up their computers.
But there are helplines out there if they're able to. And so, you know, there is a programme, as I say, of work across government to help people who are in distress.
Windfall tax. Where are we with the windfall tax?
We're having to find both immediate and longer-term measures on this.
OK, windfall tax.
On the windfall tax, I mean, the Chancellor has said we will look at measures throughout this process. And I think as a government, we have shown during the pandemic that we will absolutely change and work on policies that as issues arise. I'm not involved in those discussions that may be happening in Treasury, but what we've tried to set out in the Queen's speech is a framework for really growing our economy over the coming years. So you're not ruling it out? Well, as I'm not involved in those conversations, but the Chancellor, in fairness, has said that he will continue to review this, and he's also challenged energy companies that if they're, you know, they need to show very clearly their investment plans over the coming years for this country, because of course it's not.
We're going off at a tangent there. We're going off at a tangent, and we only have a limited amount of time, Minister, as you know.
It's not just about the next month; it's about the coming years.
Something that you will have a view on, given that you are, I think I'm right in saying, a former lawyer.
Barrister, yeah.
Barrister, forgive me. As far as the Northern Ireland Protocol is concerned, we're hearing that the Attorney-General is going to be able to prove that it won't be illegal to scrap the Northern Ireland Protocol. If that is the case, is that something that you would support?
Well, I haven't seen the advice, and of course the attorney will be seeking legal advice on matters of such significance as this. I think, as with the rest of government, my primary concern are the people of Northern Ireland. They're part of our country, they're our friends, our neighbours, our relatives, and we know that the protocol at the moment is not only creating political instability because we need to get the executive up and running, that is proving very, very difficult, but it is also providing problems for people in their day-to-day lives, so rising prices, shortage of goods and so on. I'm convinced that we will be able to find a solution to this because I'm sure that the EU will listen to our arguments, but I think it's right that we say, look, we have got to review this to see how it's working.
But it wasn't something that was foisted on us. It was this Prime Minister's idea.
Yeah, and we entered those negotiations in good faith, but after now several months, many months, it is having this impact in Northern Ireland, and we know how. So
it was a bad deal when he did it, even though he told us it was a good deal.
It was absolutely negotiated in good faith, but we have to be realistic about the political situation in Northern Ireland. We want to get that executive up and running, and we need to ensure that the Good Friday Agreement is absolutely protected because that piece is so very precious.
So it's not Westminster that's at fault, it's the Northern Ireland politicians that's at fault?
I'm not saying anyone's at fault at the moment. I'm saying exactly as I've said, Kay, that there is a difficult political situation in Northern Ireland. We want to resolve that. There always has been. Well, we have an executive that, you know, we are unable at the moment. There's
not for the first time.
No, and so we need to ensure that we can try and help local politicians set that executive up so that Northern Ireland can continue to.
We were told it was an oven-ready deal. We were told it was an oven-ready deal.
Northern Ireland's health. Yeah, absolutely. And look, we entered that negotiation in good faith, and I'm sure.
And you did a deal in good faith. That's what the EU would say.
I'm an optimist, and I'm sure that we will be able to come to common ground and find a solution with the European Union. So you don't
feel it was international? It was an international treaty, but not legally binding. Is that what we're saying?
Well, we are in the middle of it at the moment. So
is it legally binding or not?
Article 16 is in the agreement for a reason, that if there are problems, then the parties can look at how to try to address those problems. We've been working on this. I mean, we set out the command paper, I think, last summer, setting out our concerns about this. Unfortunately, some of the things that the EU has suggested, we think, don't help the situation. We think they take us backwards. So, for example, to send a birthday present to Northern Ireland under these plans, apparently one would have to complete 50 fields of a customs declaration. You know, they're part of the United Kingdom. We just want to try to find a solution.
One wonders why he didn't think about that beforehand. Before I let you go, we're almost out of time, but I want you to talk to me about your brief, if you would, quickly, in the cross-examination of video recording.
Yeah, so we have been working now for a year on trying to improve not just the convictions of rapists, people accused of rape, but also, importantly, the treatment of victims within the criminal justice system. So we're taking a forensic look at every single stage, and one of the measures that we're announcing today is that we are rolling out even further pre-recorded evidence for victims of rape and sexual assault, so that they can give evidence on a video recording much sooner after the attack, and that recording is then played in due course at the jury trial. And we're trying to do this because we know one of the reasons that we are seeing the rates of conviction being so low is that victims get to the stage where they simply can't support the prosecution anymore. We do not want that to happen. We want to support them, and so this is one of the measures that we're trying to see if that will have an improvement in the system.
OK, we are out of time. It just pops into my head, slightly out of left field, but Levi Belfield, I don't know if you've seen. Should he be allowed to get married?
Absolutely appalling. I've ordered an immediate review into this. When it came to light last night. Just to reassure people, I understand an application has been made that has not been decided yet, and he most certainly has not yet married. But if I may, he's got the right under Article 12 of the European Convention and the Human Rights Act to get married, or so they have the right to have the application considered by prison governors. And I think I'm very much welcome the debate we're about to have about the Bill of Rights and looking at human rights in the United Kingdom in the 21st century. And believe you me, I'll be raising this.
OK, sadly we're out of time. It'd be good to talk for longer. Hopefully you'll come back and see us again soon.
Thanks very much.
Bear with us just 1 second, if you would, please. Well, that story that we were just talking to the Minister about, that is dominating the papers this morning. Can't cook, won't cook. The Metro leads with the words of a Conservative MP who says food banks aren't really needed in this country and that poor people should learn to cook from scratch, which would make meals a lot cheaper. The Mail reports that the Chancellor is now warming to the idea of a windfall tax on energy companies to help ease the cost of living crisis. The Telegraph goes with Boris Johnson's announcement that the UK would send troops to Finland or Sweden if Russia ever invaded them. The Guardian highlights a Net Scientific report which claims that oil and gas companies are planning what it calls carbon bombs, major new projects which threaten to make the climate crisis worse rather than improve it. The Star features the key evidence from day 2 of the so-called Wagatha Christie libel trial at the High Court. Well, here's a story that gives new meaning to the term air mail. The Royal Mail says it plans to use drones to help deliver the post. Hard-to-reach communities will be first in line for the new routes, as Saba reports.
Look up in the sky. It's the Royal Mail hoping to take their services to new heights. It wants to introduce 50 new postal drone routes to some of the UK's most isolated communities. The company has high ambitions and hopes to bring in more than 500 new drones in the next 3 years across the UK. The first planned routes will serve more remote areas in places like the Shetland Islands, the Orkney Islands, the Hebrides, and down south, the Isles of Scilly.
The planes are able to fly autonomously. They don't need to carry a pilot on board. One of the benefits of that is they burn less fuel than a conventional aircraft. They connect up with our postmen and postwomen who will be able to deliver the items.
The Royal Mail says these drones aren't intended to replace staff, but will be there to cut out the so-called middleman, the planes, ferries and vans. And by doing so, may cut down emissions by at least 30%. It's an ambitious project, but has been tried and tested in the Isles of Scilly just last year. Islanders received COVID tests and PPE through the service.
Postal and freight deliveries have been at the mercy of the weather in the past. It could take up to a week or more even sometimes to get deliveries. The drone has the potential to speed things up tremendously, and that can only be better for the Isles of Scilly.
The project is unlikely to start for some months yet, and is subject to approval from the Civil Aviation Authority. One thing's for sure, though, the sky certainly is not the limit. Sabah Chowdhury, Sky News.
The Duke and Duchess of Cambridge have said their thoughts are with Deborah James and her family after donating an undisclosed amount to the podcaster's new cancer research fund. Balbabe has already surpassed £3 million after opening fundraising page on Monday. Ms James was diagnosed with bowel cancer in 2016 and she's now having end-of-life care. The royal couple used Twitter to thank her, saying her tireless effort to raise money was inspirational. We got the Balbabe page. We'll definitely get that for you for next hour. You can go to her Just Giving page if you would like to support her. More than £3 million raised since Monday. Quick look at the weather.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Southern Britain will be mostly fine today, but there'll be showers elsewhere and some more generally showery rain for northwest Scotland. Mainly fine now, but it's cooler than of late.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Now, see you later, alligator. Well, 2 specialist female police officers in Charleston in North Carolina managed to wrangle, and that's what you do with an alligator, wrangle it. That was wandering a bit too close to a school. The officers teamed up to jump on the gator's back and tape its jaw shut before it was taken to safety. Oh. Now, don't mind this seagull dropping in. He's a bit... literally goes in for the ice cream. He's a little bit peckish. The Daily Mail pictures a greedy bird helping himself to a scoop of ice cream, which was being enjoyed by mum and baby. What a great photograph. And the Times, final preparations for the Chelsea Flower Show begin. The Times pictures garden designer John Everest showing off his metal sculpture, which pays tribute to Air Force personnel and will be unveiled. Obviously, we just want to see this picture, don't we, going forward, at the end of May. Well, as Britain and the EU prepares for talks over trading arrangements with Northern Ireland, I'll be getting the view of a former government Brexit official. That's Philip Rycroft. That to come. Hello again, everybody. You're watching The Breakfast Show here on Sky News. The Foreign Secretary has been warned that tearing up parts of the Northern Ireland Protocol could start a trade war with the EU, and it would put peace in Ireland at risk. And also, we're told, exacerbate the cost of living crisis. Liz Truss is due to speak to the European Commission's Vice President today after negotiations on the treaty. So let's talk about it in more detail, should we? Let's see if we can make some sense of what is happening. Joining us is the former Permanent Secretary at the Department for Exiting the European Union, and that was Philip Rycroft. Hello to you, Mr Rycroft. Thanks for joining us on the programme this morning. When the deal was done, should we have envisaged that we could have found ourselves in this position?
When the deal was done, the UK government in striking the deal would have had a very good understanding of what it would entail in terms of the sorts of checks that are causing the problems now. This is about, the deal was about managing trade on the island of Ireland after Brexit. So all the issues that we're dealing with now were predictable when the deal was done.
So we should have seen this coming?
Absolutely. Now, you could say that the Commission has been a bit overzealous in the way that it's interpreted the deal and the way in which it is seeking to implement the deal. The Commission, for its part, is saying, maybe hands up, maybe we weren't overzealous at the start of this, but we have been looking pretty hard at ways to ease the burden of implementation. And they've made some significant moves, for example, on medicines, and there are other offers on the table to try and reduce the number of checks that are required. But at the heart of this remains the key issue, which is the protocol put in place to manage one of the big conundrums of Brexit. How do you deal with trade on the island of Ireland post-Brexit?
But that was always the problem, wasn't it? And that was the downfall for Theresa May. Prime Minister said that we had an oven-ready deal. There it was done, sorted.
Well, so Mrs May had an alternative deal, which would, of course, would have avoided what this Prime Minister signed up to, which was a border down the Irish Sea. Remember, Mrs May said when this was first proposed by the European Commission, this could not be agreed by any British Prime Minister. That was the position that Prime Minister Johnson overturned in doing this deal, in agreeing effectively to a border down the Irish Sea. Mrs May's deal that she was trying to construct with the backstop and so on was designed explicitly to avoid this outcome, but that was rejected by the current government. They agreed to put the border down the Irish Sea, and we're now dealing with the consequences of that decision.
Do you have some sympathy for the Prime Minister, though, because it's the intransigence of the DUP that is causing the problems for him?
Well, clearly the DUP is being intransigent. The DUP has had a difficult position on Brexit pretty much throughout. But every time the UK government says we'll invoke Article 16, we'll scrap the treaty unilaterally, in a sense they put more wood on that fire. There's very little incentive now for the DUP to back off and say, no, we need to work with the other parties in Northern Ireland to see if we can find a way forward, because every time they apply pressure, the UK government seems to accept that pressure by saying we will abrogate this treaty, we will breach our international commitments by unilaterally scrapping elements of the treaty. So there's really no incentive on the DUP to seek to compromise.
Do you think it's possible legally to scrap parts of the treaty?
Well, there's advice that we hear this morning that the Attorney General has that it is legal. The question is legal under whose law? It may be legal under UK law, but if you ask the European Commission, if you ask the US administration, if you ask those many other countries around the world with whom the UK has deals, treaties, or would like to have deals and treaties, whether they think it's legal, they, I think, would look askance at that advice in terms of the UK's obligations to meet its international commitments.
We hear a lot, you mentioned it just in your previous answer, about Article 16 and that process. Tell us in layman's terms what that actually means.
So under the terms of the protocol, if either side believes that there are issues that can't be resolved on a day-to-day basis, then invoking Article 16 essentially pushes the pause button and then would trigger a process by where the two sides seek to resolve those issues. That's rather different from what seems to be the UK government's approach now, which is essentially through UK law to unilaterally remove the obligations on the UK to have any checks on goods going from GB to Northern Ireland. But in whether it's Article 16 or whether it's the unilaterally tearing up the treaty, one has to ask the question, what problem does this solve? Because even if the UK takes that action, you still have the underlying issue, which is the management of trade on the island of Ireland in a post-Brexit world.
What's your prediction?
It's very difficult to see how this moves forward. I hope that this is part of what the UK government has done before. It's a sort of calling a bluff. It's a bit of a weird negotiating position in my view, but it's sort of toughening up the UK position in the hope that that extracts more concessions from the EU, and then there is this process, the negotiations go forward, and ultimately a resolution is found. That's the sort of optimistic scenario. The pessimistic scenario is that the UK means it this time. It does effectively tear up the protocol. The EU will react very badly to that. We may well end up with a trade war. And then the uncertainty that is already impacting on businesses in Northern Ireland will spill over to the rest of the UK. That would be really bad news at a time when clearly there is a cost of living crisis. The last thing we want is a trade war with our largest trading partner.
We hear you. It's good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, a short while ago, I spoke to the Minister for Tackling Violence Against Women and Girls, Victoria Atkins. I asked her whether she agreed with the comments of a Conservative MP who said that families are relying on food banks because of a lack of cooking skills.
when I was watching Lee in the chamber, I think he was talking about his own local food bank and how the food bank was trying to offer not just immediate help with provision of food, but also longer-term help, for example, help with budgeting and so on.
This is where the point where you say you don't agree with him. That was a ridiculous, crass thing for him to say, and he needs to apologise.
Yeah, in fairness, I have said I don't agree with him.
And he needs to apologise.
I mean, Lee is very articulate. He will, I'm sure, make himself clear. I think he's doing a bit of media today. But this is not the view of me or anyone else in government.
Tamara's here. What a stupid thing for him to say.
Well, Lee Anderson, who was speaking in this cost of living debate yesterday, was saying these quite inflammatory comments, saying there isn't this massive use for food banks in this country. He said you've got a generation who cannot cook properly. They cannot cook a meal from scratch and they cannot budget. Now, Victoria Atkins was initially sort of defending him there, saying that he was talking about a food bank in his constituency, and indeed he has clarified on the radio this morning, saying that he was talking about a food bank in Nottinghamshire, where in return for giving you food, they also help you budget and give you advice about how to cook meals out of it. But this has attracted a lot of strong reaction, given that, you know, so many households are really struggling to make ends meet with enormous energy bills at the moment. You've got the food poverty campaigner Jack Monroe saying you can't cook a meal from scratch with nothing. So this is not something that people in government are thrilled about. I think they were holding their heads in their hands when it sort of made headlines this morning because, of course, they're being accused of not doing enough to help families who are really struggling. They're under massive pressure to do more. That's the theme of Boris Johnson's cabinet meeting. It's kind of away day today in Stoke-on-Trent to discuss the cost of living. So as a backdrop to that, it's not ideal.
OK, I'll see if we can... Darren might be able to find us the grab again that he said in the Commons. But this is what he said on Facebook. He said, "Got to press again." Rude. I did not say poor people cannot cook or there is no need for food banks. I said that there is not the need currently being parroted out by the MSM. Today I challenged the whole Parliamentary Labour Party to come to Ashfield to visit the food bank I work with, to give food parcels away on the condition they enrol for cooking and budgeting lessons. He said, I did not say poor people cannot cook or there is no need for food banks. This is what he did say.
There's not this massive use for food banks in this country. We've got generation after generation who cannot cook properly, they can't cook a meal from scratch, they cannot budget. The challenge is there.
It's not going to play out well today, this, is it?
No, I think it's important to say that he did not say that there was no need for food banks. He said that there are some in his constituency, and there probably is a debate to be had about people's cooking skills and whether they could be made to go further. But certainly it sounded as if, to many ears, that he was saying, look, if people could just cook properly, they wouldn't need to go to food banks, when a lot of people are desperately struggling to pay for food as well as everything else, given the enormous inflation pressures and pressures of high energy bills. We know that it's not just people on the lowest incomes, it's across the spectrum. And I think, given the Conservatives are under pressure to do something about that, I'm sure that he wouldn't be surprised if he was asked to clarify or lean towards an apology by the end of today. Must be said, Lee Anderson used to be a Labour councillor, defected to the Conservatives. Indeed, he's not someone who's sort of an aristocratic kind of MP, but certainly sees himself as someone very plain speaking. But I think a lot of his colleagues will be a bit horrified by how this has played out.
Indeed so. For now, thank you. At 9 o'clock, tomorrow's take. Now, Agatha Christie. It's a story that goes back almost 3 years to when Colleen Rooney accused Rebecca Vardy of leaking false stories about her private life. Mrs Vardy denies all claims, and her libel suit at the High Court is now entering its third day. Joining us now to discuss all of that is Paul Tweed. He's an international media lawyer. Hi, Paul. Thanks for joining us on the programme this morning. What's your take on what's happened so far?
Good morning, Kay. Well, it's a difficult case to read at the outset. I think people would have regarded it as being a straightforward situation in terms of somebody leaked, somebody was responsible for the leak, and that somebody was a clearly identifiable person. But as the evidence has progressed, it's maybe not, certainly not as clear-cut as people may have thought at that time. I can't comment on the specifics of the evidence, as this is an ongoing live case. But the important factor here, in my opinion, is that this case is being heard by a judge sitting alone as opposed to a jury. Back in the day, whenever libel actions were last in the headlines in the 80s and 90s, people were bracing themselves for massive damages awards because that seemed to be, a jury tended to take a view, and they converted that view into very, very substantial sums. With a judge sitting alone, this is a very experienced judge who will be analysing the evidence. She will have known in advance what a lot of the issues are going to be, as there have been a number of preliminary hearings and applications, and so it's just going to be very interesting as to see how this case pans out. In other words, while the onus is on the defendant, Colleen Rooney, to establish that the truth and to justify what she tweeted. The other side of the coin is that Rebecca Vardy, as she has been doing in her evidence, will have to persuade the court that she was not responsible in any way for this.
OK, so what does the judge actually need to consider, Mrs. Justice Stein?
Well, first of all, she will be assessing the credibility of all the witnesses in terms of the truth and accuracy of the evidence they're giving. She's got to really get to the bottom of where, the defendant made the statement. She's got to justify that statement. But if the statement is found to be correct, then it's still, this is a case where the defamatory inference comes from the statement. So the judge has got to dig in and find out, was the claimant actually, in fact, responsible for the actions that are the subject of the proceedings. And as I say, it's not as clear-cut as might have appeared at the outset. The problem with all of these cases, and we saw it in the earlier case of Johnny Depp against his son, it's not just a question of a court focusing on the specific issue that's under complaint. A person's character is immediately put under the microscope. Their past conduct is put under the microscope. And that in turn is something that anyone who embarks on a high-profile libel action of this nature has to take very much into account before they embark on it. Because once the case starts, once people start to enter the witness box, it's too late, particularly in the era we're living now, in the same way that the offending tweet was disseminated to thousands. Immediately, it hit online. This hearing is being reported live, word for word. Immediately, the words are uttered in the witness box. And so it is going round the world here at the moment, at a speed that is symptomatic of our times. And, I've been in this business as a media lawyer for over 4 decades. I look back in the 1980s and the 1990s, and it really was quite quaint by comparison. Normally you had a situation where somebody was perhaps suing a newspaper or an individual, but it was very much focused on a small area of the public domain that it would not have been disseminated worldwide, for instance. People did not have these international reputations or international problems. This is where we are going today. And the questions we really all have to ask ourselves is, regardless of the outcome of this particular case, are the courts really a suitable venue to have this sort of spat?
Yeah, once you open Pandora's box, who knows what might come out. We've seen the two women arriving day after day, and deliciously exciting for the tabloids was that we saw Wayne Rooney accompanying his wife on a couple of occasions. I suppose one of the big questions that I'm asked when people are talking about this is, how much is it going to cost, all of this?
Well, yes, that's a sort of very much an open question. The legal costs will be eye-watering. There's been speculation of £1 million for each side, and under the procedures, it will only be possible to recover probably a maximum of 70%, even for the winners. So no matter what the outcome, each party is going to be down a substantial 6-figure sum. In terms of damages, I can't speculate. In this case, as I say, it's a live case and it will be for the judge to decide. But, I was involved in a case just ironically this time last year for the former Northern Ireland First Minister in relation where she sued over a defamatory tweet, and a judge sitting alone, awarded 125,000 for that tweet, albeit there were aggravating factors involved there in relation to the conduct of the defendant. But certainly, the damages are rising, albeit not at the jaw-dropping scale that we were getting from jury awards in the past.
OK, it's good to talk to you. Thanks for explaining all of that to us. Much appreciated.
My pleasure.
Levi Belfield has asked permission to get married in jail. The serial killer proposed to a female visitor at HMP Frankland in County Durham, where he's serving 2 whole life orders for murdering Marcia McDonnell, Amélie de la Grange and also Millie Dowler. I asked the Justice Minister, Victoria Atkins, about his request to marry.
Absolutely appalling. I've ordered an immediate review into this when it came to light last night. Just to reassure people, I understand an application has been made that has not been decided yet, and he most certainly has not yet married. But if I may, he's got the right under Article 12 of the European Convention and the Human Rights Act to get married, or so they have the right to have the application considered by prison governors. And I think I'm very much welcome the debate we're about to have about the Bill of Rights and looking at human rights in the United Kingdom in the 21st century. And believe you me, I'll be raising this.
Quick look at the weather for you now.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Southern Britain will be mostly fine today, but there'll be showers elsewhere and some more generally showery rain for northwestern Scotland. Mainly fine now, but it's cooler than recently, with a ground frost in some northern and western parts.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
OK, so this next story is my worst nightmare. A passenger who took the wheel in an aeroplane when the pilot fell unconscious has been hailed a hero.
I've got a serious situation here. My pilot gone incoherent. I have no idea how to fly the airplane.
What was the situation with the pilot?
He is incoherent. He is out.
Try to hold the wings level and
passenger in the plane flying along Florida's Atlantic coast used the cockpit radio to make this urgent plea for help. Minutes passed before controllers were able to locate the aircraft, which by then was heading north over Boca Raton. The passenger landed safely at Palm Beach Airport. That is amazing. Goodness me, that's going to take nerves of steel, isn't it? The other thing I want to let you know about is the fact that we are going up to Wigan next week, my hometown, as many of you know, for a special series of programmes, Back to My Roots. That was the last time I was there, back in 2019. Did you know this bit is actually Wigan here, just this bit? It used to be where the coal came and they used to tip it up onto the, what are they called? Things that go on canals. Can't remember the word. Barges, that's the word. Thanks, Darren. Barges to go down to the Manchester Ship Canal. All today's top stories coming up in just a second.